How did a player considered slow, not very explosive, and lacking elite athleticism become one of the hardest scorers to guard in the history of the National Basketball Association? How did someone who wasn't the fastest, the strongest, or the tallest end up creating one of the most devastating moves basketball has ever seen? The story of James Harden doesn't start with spectacular dunks or ridiculous physical talent. It starts with something much simpler and much more dangerous: absolute control of the basketball. In a league dominated by super athletes, Harden found a completely different way to take over the game. He didn't beat defenders with speed. He beat them with timing, rhythm, and manipulation. And with just one skill pushed to the absolute limit of perfection, he changed the way offensive basketball is played in the NBA. In this video, you're going to discover how a player who started his career as just the third offensive option transformed into the most feared ball handler on the planet, created a move that's practically impossible to defend, and forced the entire league to adapt to his style. But before we continue, go ahead and drop a like, because videos like this help keep the history of the NBA alive here on the channel. And tell me down in the comments, is James Harden the greatest ball handler in history? Or is there someone you put above him? Now get ready, because to understand how Harden took over the game, we need to go back to the moment when almost nobody believed he could become a superstar. When James Harden arrived in the National Basketball Association in 2009, almost no one imagined he would become one of the most dominant offensive players of his generation. Selected with the third overall pick in the draft by the Oklahoma City Thunder, Harden joined a team that already had two young phenoms destined for superstardom: Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook. Durant was the pure scorer, tall, smooth, and almost impossible to contest. Westbrook was pure athletic explosion, speed, power, and intensity. And Harden just seemed solid. He didn't have Westbrook's insane speed, nor Durant's natural scoring talent. In the early years of his career, he was mainly seen as an excellent sixth man, someone who came off the bench to stabilize the offense. In fact, in 2012, he won the NBA Sixth Man of the Year award, showing offensive efficiency and high basketball IQ. But even at that moment, few analysts imagined Harden could one day become the absolute centerpiece of an offense. He wasn't known for violent dunks. He wasn't leading highlight reels. It didn't seem to possess the type of athleticism that usually defines the league superstars. However, something different was quietly developing in his game. While most players focused on speed, strength, and explosiveness, Harden was building something much rarer: an almost hypnotic relationship with the ball. His dribble looked calm, patient, and incredibly controlled, as if he were always a few seconds ahead of the defender. At the time, few people realized that this seemingly simple ability was turning into the weapon that would completely change the direction of his career, and that, years later, would make entire NBA defenses look completely lost trying to guard him. If you watch James Harden's early games in the National Basketball Association, you might not immediately notice what would make him special. There weren't insane athletic explosions or plays that made the entire arena jump out of their seats in shock. But something was happening in the details. While most young players were trying to impress with speed and power, Harden was developing a much more subtle skill, and a much more dangerous one. He was learning how to control the pace of the game through his dribble. During his years with the Oklahoma City Thunder, Harden began obsessively studying how defenders reacted to small changes in rhythm. Instead of simply attacking the rim with explosive speed, he started slowing the game down. Pause. Wait. Observe. That patience created something extremely uncomfortable for any defender: uncertainty. Harden understood that offensive basketball wasn't just about speed, it was about manipulation. When a defender thought he was about to accelerate, Harden slowed down. When the defender relaxed, Harden attacked suddenly. That constant change in timing created a kind of psychological pressure that very few players could generate. Another trait that started to stand out was his low ball control. Harden kept his dribble extremely close to his body, making any steal attempt incredibly difficult. Every move looked calculated. Every hesitation had a purpose. He wasn't just dribbling to move up the court. He was setting the defender up to make a mistake. Over the years, that obsession began to completely transform his offensive style. What looked like just an efficient dribble was evolving into something much bigger: a way to manipulate the space on the court and force the defender to constantly react. And when that skill finally found the right system to flourish, the result would be something that changed modern basketball forever. When James Harden arrived at the Houston Rockets in 2012, something completely changed in his career. For the first time, He was no longer the third offensive option. Now the entire offense revolved around him. And it was in that environment that the skill Harden had been quietly refining finally exploded onto the world stage. With full freedom to control the ball and dictate the rhythm of offensive possessions, Harden began developing a move that, just a few years later, would become one of the most iconic plays in NBA history, his famous step back. At first glance, it looked like a simple move. Harden would drive toward the defender, threaten to attack the basket, and, at the exact moment the opponent reacted, he would take a quick step backward, creating enough space to shoot a three-pointer. But the genius of the move was in the perfect timing between the dribble, the fake, and the step back. The defender was always half a second late. And in basketball, half a second is an eternity. As the seasons went on, the move became almost impossible to defend. Harden repeated the play countless times in the same game, and defenders still kept falling into the trap. During his NBA Most Valuable Player award season in 2018, he pushed that offensive style to the extreme, finishing the year with incredible averages and leading the league in scoring. The step back wasn't just an occasional weapon anymore. It became the heart of an entire offensive system. On every possession, defenders knew exactly what might happen, and they still couldn't stop it. The impact was so massive that, soon after, young players across the league started studying and copying the move. Coaches began teaching the step back as part of the modern offensive toolkit. What started as Harden's personal solution quickly turned into a global basketball trend. And at that moment, it became clear that his dribble was no longer just an impressive skill. He had created a whole new way to attack in a modern game. What made James Harden's game so impossible to defend wasn't just natural talent. There was real science behind his offensive style. While many players relied on physical explosiveness to beat defenders, Harden developed something far more complex, a constant system of reading the defender. Every possession was almost like a psychological game. Harden analyzed the position of the opponent's feet, the distance between their bodies, and even how the defender shifted their weight before reacting. From those small details, he decided his next move. That level of control became even more obvious during his years with the Houston Rockets, when the team's offense revolved entirely around his ability to create space in isolation. Harden wasn't just playing one-on-one. He was manipulating every reaction from the defender. One of the most devastating elements of his game was his change of pace. Instead of attacking at the same speed every time, he alternated between long pauses and sudden bursts. This created hesitation in the defender, who never really knew when the real move was coming. And when the defender finally reacted, it was usually already too late. Another key detail was the way Harden used his body to protect the ball. His low dribble, extremely close to his body, made any steal attempt incredibly difficult, while his lateral movements created angles that were almost impossible to contest. Over time, defenses across the National Basketball Association started developing specific strategies just to try to slow Harden down. On some possessions, defenders even went as far as guarding him with their hands behind their backs, trying to avoid any contact that could lead to fouls. It was an almost surreal scene. Professional players, some of the best defenders on the planet, trying to find any possible solution to stop a single player and his unpredictable dribble. But even with all the tactical adjustments, Harden kept finding ways to create space. Because deep down, his greatest weapon wasn't just the move itself. It was his ability to make the defender choose the wrong decision at the exact moment. Throughout the history of basketball, many players became legends by dominating several areas of the game at the same time: scoring, defense, athleticism, leadership. But the journey of James Harden shows something different. It proves that sometimes a single skill pushed to its absolute limit can change the sport forever. Harden turned the dribble into something far bigger than just an offensive tool. He turned it into a way to completely control the game. During his years with the Houston Rockets, he became one of the most dominant scorers of his generation, putting together multiple seasons, averaging over 30 points per game, and winning the NBA Most Valuable Player award in 2018. At the peak of his career, it felt like every offensive possession was a show of patience, calculation, and precision. Defenders knew the step back could happen at any moment. They knew the change of pace was coming. They knew the dribble was setting something up. And even so, many times they still couldn't stop it. Over the years, the impact of Harden's style started showing up all across the league. Young players began practicing the step back from the earliest levels of the game. Coaches started encouraging isolation and space creation as a core part of modern offensive systems. In a way, Harden helped redefine what it means to be an offensive creator in today's NBA. But maybe the most impressive part of his story is how it all started. Not with extraordinary physical gifts, not with ridiculous athletic ability. It all started with something that seemed simple, a player determined to completely master the ball in his hands. And by turning that skill into a weapon that was almost impossible to defend, Harden didn't just build a historic career. He left a permanent mark on the evolution of basketball. Now the question that remains is inevitable. Will a future player ever take ball control to an even higher level, or are we looking at the greatest defender manipulator the game has ever seen? If you enjoyed this story, drop a like on the video and share it with that friend who loves basketball. And tell me down in the comments, is Harden's step back the most unstoppable offensive move in modern NBA history? The story of James Harden proves that greatness in basketball doesn't always come from the most impressive athleticism, but from the obsession with perfecting a skill to its absolute limit. By transforming his dribble, his pace, and his famous step back into a devastating weapon, Harden changed the way offense is played in the National Basketball Association. What started as a small detail in his game became a quiet revolution on the court. And maybe that's the biggest lesson from his journey. Mastering something deeply can be enough to change an entire era of the sport and inspire the next generation of players.